A new layer of consulting is about to emerge. Leaders stop being impressed by automation. It becomes expected, invisible, part of how the business runs. We implement AI. That sentence will lose status quickly. Because the real question will become, are we getting what this system should already be delivering? AI will change what companies can measure, what they expect and what they're willing to pay for. After installation, after the system go live, at the point where the business asks, how do we get more measurable impact from what we already have? A company can have the tools in place, connected and functioning, and still under-capture value. Why? Because value doesn't come from tools alone. You need the environment tuned for outcomes. Because implementation is finity. Business performance is not. A new layer of consulting is about to emerge. Because AI will change what companies can measure, what they expect and what they're willing to pay for. We are moving into a world where AI systems can do far more than automate tasks. They can detect patterns, coordinate work, recommend actions, and increasingly improve how execution happens over time. And once that becomes normal, something fundamental changes. Companies stop paying for activity and they start paying for additional measurable results. That's the shift. Until now, most consulting value has sat in a design, implementation, integration, and rollout. That work still matters, but it will no longer be the whole answer. Because once a company already has the tool in place, the real commercial question changes. It's no longer, can you install the system? It becomes, can you get more from this environment that it's already delivering? That's where the second layer appears. Implementation service still matter. The outcome layer sits on top of them and gets judged by the measurable uplift it creates above the baseline. That is what this episode is about. So let's start with the first thing that changes when AI becomes normal inside the business. One thing most people still underestimate is that the first wave of AI-driven improvement will soon be expected. Across industries, companies will start running with a similar foundation. Core tools become standard, agent frameworks become common, CRM intelligence become embedded, enablement copilot become expected, and once those foundations become common, companies start getting similar first wave of gains. Better productivity, faster response time, more consistent follow-up, quicker internal workflows, earlier signal detection. That first layer of improvement will stop feeling special. It becomes expected. And when that happens, buyer psychology changes. Leaders stop being impressed by automation, same way they stop being impressed by cloud migration, Wi-Fi, or having a CRM in place. It becomes expected, invisible, part of how the business runs. You're not going to see CEOs going to keep standing on the stage saying, we implement AI. That sentence will lose status quickly. Because the real question will become, are we getting what this system should already be delivering? And that question creates a new market. And once that baseline becomes expected, the buying conversation changes with it dramatically. Today, many RFPs still ask for architecture, integrations, roadmap, frameworks, capability models, feature lists. That will not stay at the center much longer. Because once baseline capability is assumed, buyers stop buying capability. They start buying uplift. So the brief starts sounding different. We need 20% more conversion above our current baseline. We want 50% more revenue from the system we already installed. We need churn reduced by 10% beyond what the current environment is already delivering. That is very different brief. And it changes what the client believes they're buying. They're no longer asking for implementation. They're asking for delta. That's changed the consulting model. The RFP moves from system-based to outcome-based. And this is the part most people still miss. Outcome-based RFPs do not just change consulting. They change what the client believes they're purchasing. Because the buyer is no longer saying, build me the capability. They're saying, produce the delta. That is a very different contract and a very different consulting model. Because uplift required a different kind of work. But even that is not the full story. Because baseline AI still doesn't guarantee the full results. Now let's talk about why baseline AI will not produce maximum outcomes. Even with the best tools in place, companies will still leave value uncaptured. That is where the next layer starts. Because the issue is no longer just whether the tools work. The issue is whether the environment is producing the full commercial result it should. And that gap is real. A company can have the tools in place, connected and functioning, and still under-capture value. Why? Because value doesn't come from tools alone. It comes from how the system behaves, how signals move, how actions get triggered, how workflows are sequenced, how exceptions are handled, how human judgment is positioned, and how multiple systems shaped one better outcome together. That's why this goes beyond technology. It sits in design of how the environment actually works. This is the gap between what the system can do and what the business is actually capturing. And that's exactly where the next layer begins. Now, we get to the next layer. AI will create a new layer between infrastructure and the business results. I call it outcome layer. It sits above the strategy, transformation, and implementation with one job: measurable uplift above baseline. It doesn't start from zero. It starts after the systems are already in place. The question at that point is no longer whether the tools work. The question is where the value is still being left uncaptured and what has to change for the business to get more from what it already has. That means asking where is value still being left uncaptured after the implementation? Which signals still fail to trigger actions? Where is the sequence wrong? Where is human intervention slowing the outcome instead of improving it? Where are connected systems still falling short of the results they should produce? What uplift should still be possible above the current baseline? How that uplift will be measured? This layer becomes more important as the system gets smarter. Because the smarter the environment gets, the more valuable the frame becomes that define what better actually means for the business. That is why this is a real layer. It is not about installation, enablement, or basic integration. It's about helping the business get more measurable value from the system that they're already in place. So where does that value still get stuck, even after the tools are live? Even when the tools are installed properly, companies can still leave value uncaptured. Implementation gets the system working, it doesn't guarantee the full commercial results. And that gap usually show up in 7 places. Weak trigger design, the system surface insight but nothing meaningful happens next. The signal is there, the response is not. Then bad sequencing. The right action happens too late, in the wrong order, or by the wrong team. Then there is a poor intervention design. Humans step in too early, too late, or without clear rules. Broken cross-functional flow. The tool works, but the functions around them are still not aligned around what to do next. No decision ownership. The system surfaces the issue, but no one owns what happened next. Weak exceptional logic. The system works in standard cases, but struggle under enterprise complexity, pricing pressure, legal frictions, procurement realities, or renewal risk. The tool was adapted, but the operating model was not. The vendor installed the product, the business still behaved with old logic. That is where the extra value gets lost. That is where the outcome layer sits. After installation, after the system go live, at the point where the business asks, how do we get more measurable impact from what we already have? Now let me make this real with one example. Salesforce with Einstein can show how the opportunity looks. Gong can show what the bar is really telling you. Clari can show the forecast risk building. But the outcome layer is what turns those signals into the right response path. That's where additional value gets captured. Not from installation more tools, from designing what happens next. Now, this is the point. Most companies think the value is having those signals. It's not. And it's not only in assigning one person to make a call. The outcome layer starts when those signals no longer stay separate. They trigger a design response across the business. That means the company has already defined what combination of signals matters, what threshold triggers intervention, who steps in first, whether the deal stays in commit or move to review, whether the strategy changes, and what actions now gives the business the best chance of better outcome. That's why tuning matters. Because the tools can already be live, connected, and working, and the business can still leave value on the table. And this is also why this doesn't become one-time project. It becomes a standing category. Because implementation is finity. Business performance is not. Once the environment is live, the work shifts away from more installation toward better design. Commercial pressure changes, customer behavior changes, priority moves, risk pattern move with them. So the environment has to keep being tuned as the conditions change. It's an ongoing capability, and no single functions can own it alone. It touches revenue, marketing, customer success, operations, finance, legal. So companies will do one of two things: build this layer internally or buy it externally. Either way, the layer becomes real. Because once baseline capability becomes common, the next edge is not having the tools. It's getting more from them. This is where additional value gets created. And once that extra uplift becomes visible, the commercial model changes too. For years, consulting was mostly sold on efforts, hours, delivery, implementation. Because the extra value created by the work was harder to isolate with confidence. AI changes that. Once company has a clear baseline and the system can track what changed after implementation, tuning, or redesign, the business can separate where the uplift actually come from. That means three things become easier to see. What uplift came from getting the system live, what came from tuning it further, what came from redesigning how it operates. And once that becomes measurable, commercial model changes with it. Consulting can charge for the delta, clients can pay for the uplift. That's why this layer emerges. Because the question becomes, how much more value did it create above the baseline? This is where commercial model changes. So if I pull all of that together, here is the real shift. System integrators and vendors deliver the baseline. The outcome layer builds on top of that and focus on measurable uplift. As baseline capability become expected and uplift become measurable, companies will spend less on capabilities for its own sake and more for the added value created after the systems are already in place. That's the shift. And here is the simplest test for whether this layer exists in your company. If AI is already installed and you are still not capturing the outcomes you expected, you probably do not need more tools. You need the environment tuned for outcomes. That is the outcome layer. This is what AI for Sales Edge is built for. Showing where execution failed, what operating logic is actually driving outcome, and how AI changed the system only when the system is designed to decide. I'm Jelena. This is AI for Sales Edge. Real stories, real results, no fluff.